I think it's perfect that we're going back to the basics with this, with the ring system to start with, and then we'll look at strengths, and we're just going to go through a series of reinforcing some of those basics again. I'm going to bring out some things you're familiar with. The Clifton Strengths is the assessment that we use. And in the future, we'll be able to map Myers-Briggs and Enneagram and DISC all to the ultimate goal is capturing a picture of what you look like at your best. We call that the genius paragraph, and how your strengths get in your way. We call that the kryptonite paragraph. We differ from most systems in talking about strengths and weaknesses. We don't look at your bottom unless we're doing executive coaching, because in reality, the things that get you in trouble are your strengths under pressure or when you're unaware of how they work, how other people are experiencing them. That's what we call the kryptonite. And when I've coached and when I have a high level leader who is in trouble, so to speak, it's typically those two issues. It's not the fact that, for me, empathy is 34 and harmony is 33. Those typically don't get me in trouble. In fact, they never get me in trouble. It's when I'm under pressure, my strengths of strategic and achiever become really intense, just dialing in on the goal and getting it done. And under stress, it gets very intense. And then I lose awareness of how other people are experiencing that. Now, the whole purpose of Genius Spark was to help leverage all the insight of the Clifton Strengths that is difficult on its own. There are 33,600,000 combinations of the strengths. That's the good news. And we've gone through demonstrations of taking each person's strengths and looking at strengths that amplify each other, strengths that balance each other, combination of strengths, and looking at it through that lens. But that takes a long time to learn, and it's not essential. What is essential is I know what I look like at my best, and you know how to talk to me about that. So if I'm working for you, the conversation is, Rex, in that last presentation, where did you show up at your best? What did it feel like? Because we've shown how the strengths are part of your hardwiring and release 4 incredible hormones. So there's a feeling behind using your strengths. So you're asking me, where did I feel those highlight moments? What strengths do I think I was tapping into? What would I like to improve, and how can I help you? That's all a manager needs to know in order to be an incredible manager and not know anything about strategic or achiever or relator or any of those strengths. So the Clifton Strengths tells us what someone has. It's their cards. Think of the rings as a deck of cards, 5 cards. So the Clifton Strengths tells you what's in the hand, but it doesn't tell you what the hand is, like a full house or a straight or something like that. That's where the rings come in. It's a sense-making system to take this 33 million combinations and create a pattern recognition system where it's fast and it's intuitive, and in a very short amount of time, you know something about the person, where their dominant energy is, where they're most fluid. That's a key part of the Genius Spark system. When we look at it, we've divided the zones, and Gallup has their 4 domains, and Core Clarity has their 4 quadrants, what we call our zones. We've created a continuous circle in our system pattern instead of having gaps. One of the things we found with one of the systems is that as they were dropping the 5 strengths into the 4 zones, in the old system, I would have been what they call a caregiver. And that's the relating, thinking, and acting zones. We call that the servant leader, but not the motivating. So my archetype would show blue, green, and orange, but have a gap in the red. And we had people feeling, oh, there might be something. What am I missing? Is that bad? We wanted to communicate that, nope, you're a whole person. And It just tells us where your dominant energy is. We also call these zones languages, where you're most fluent. And we'll talk about what those different languages are. The blue is the relating zone. The language is the instinct you've got. Remember, the strengths are these dominant parts of the brain that react instinctively and in real time. And I'll go back to Gallup. Now, Gallup has what they call their domains, but they don't have a pattern language around it. And it's interesting that Core Clarity and Gallup categorize 12 of the strengths differently. And we'll talk about that. We've got a zone map. I've worked with Gallup. When I wrote the book, I had to submit everything to them so that their data scientist would look at it. These two systems exist out there, and I'll go through our system and then we'll compare what Gallup does and what Core Clarity does in something called the zone map. So we start at the top. The red and the blue are strengths that are activated by others. We call those the outgoing strengths or the interpersonal strengths. The blue is more around interpersonal dynamics. The red is oftentimes more social dynamics. But the common denominator is that they're activated by other people. You get energized by them, or they get activated in interaction. So the more strength someone has in those two upper zones, the more they will tend to be what we call extroverted. And our definition of extrovert is where you get your energy from outside of you. Now, in the blue, if someone is dominant in the blues, let's say they've got 3 or 4 of their strengths in the top, but most of them are in the blue, that's more relationship oriented. It's more about the interpersonal. More in the red, it's more not necessarily relationship, but it feels relational and it's more social. Now, again, these are patterns or tendencies. What we're trying to do is take these 33,600,000 combinations and give you a pattern language like a deck of cards. Now, the instincts with the relating are around the nonverbal elements that make relationships work. Some examples. Empathy instinctively puts themselves in someone else's shoes and can sense or feel what the other person is experiencing. And because of that, they have great insight and intuition. They also make it very easy for the other person to feel comfortable and psychologically safe. So we call that an intuitive strength in terms of the relationship side of it. There are connecting strengths. Communication can be a relating strength. And what it does extremely well is it can read audiences or can take words and connect it to people in an emotional way, whether it's in speaking or writing. But they read audiences well and they can tailor messaging. That's one of the connecting relating strengths. Then a category of the bonding strengths, the deep bonding, the relator and responsibility. We talk about those as circles of trust, where the relator is around trustworthiness, genuineness, transparency. So they have these instincts around people who have similar traits of what you might call the golden rule or reciprocity. And responsibility has that instinct around reliability and loyalty. There is a magic side to these strengths, and the magic side in the relating zone is that ability to sense where somebody is at and to build that relational connection with people. There's also a survival side to it. And that survival side is when the radar goes off inside of you, like for someone with relator and they sense somebody is disingenuous or can't be trusted, we call that the bullshit meter. If you have a blue relating strength, when that radar goes off, it's telling you to pay attention. Most of the time, we don't pay attention to that. And it's only after the fact that we go back and said, oh, should have said something, or I should have avoided that. Part of what we're trying to help people do when we develop them through the aha, here's my strengths, and oh, that's what they mean, and oh, that's what they feel like, and oh, that's what it feels like under pressure. To be able to do this in real time and not have that delayed reaction. I was with a group yesterday doing construction projects. It's the Lean Construction Institute, and presenting that the research shows that projects don't go wrong, they start wrong. One of the things we've built as a tool are the 8 early warning signs. And one of those early warning signs is your gut, your instinct. That's the survival side of the brain. And I asked the group how many had been on a project that went sideways, and almost everybody raised their hand. And I said, you haven't been in the business very long if you didn't raise your hand. And then I asked the question, when did you first sense that it was going sideways? Everybody, without exception, said either in the first day or within the first 2 weeks or when the contract came out, very early. But the question is, did you do anything about it? This genius capacity that we've talked about that's in us, we said it's not rare, it's dormant. And that's one of the manifestations of it being dormant. We sense these things, but we don't know how to interpret them, and we don't know how to respond. When my relator goes off and I get that check in my gut, that cortisol, it doesn't mean I'm right. I won't be as open or transparent, and I'll wait and I'll test a bit. And so doesn't mean the instincts are right, but it does mean to pay attention to them. So that's the blue relating. I'll pause with the blue and the relating thing here and see if there's any questions on that. Okay. When we go into the red, the motivating, think of the motivating as an emotional thermostat. It sets the emotional energy. Think of the relating as a thermometer. It registers the emotional energy. And with the red, what instinctively is seeing opportunity, seeing potential, and then being activated into how to bring that out. And there's a range of motivating strengths. There are those influencing strengths like positivity or winning others over or developer that are very, what you might call soft skill oriented. And then there are the more direct hardline, like competition, challenging people, or command, confronting people, or maximizer, that high expectation level. And again, they operate in the same way where if you can activate them, you feel the surge of energy. If you can't activate them, you feel constrained, and to some degree, you feel the cortisol. So now we're going to go to the bottom two. And what we've got, the green are the thinking strength. So the green are, there's a wide range. In fact, it's the most populated zone in terms of strengths. And you've got high level strengths, deep dive strengths. You've got past perspective strengths. You've got forward looking strengths. You've got linear thinking strengths. You've got hyperlinked kinds of strengths. So you've got this wide range of thinking there. What's common between the green and the orange is they're both internal. They're happening inside. The acting strengths is a range of what you might call the starting or catalyst strengths, the sustaining strengths, and the finishing strengths. Achiever is a finishing strength. Activator is a starting strength. Focus is a sustaining strength. Self-assurance is a sustaining strength. Now, when we look at other kinds of combinations, what we see are the blue and the green together. On the left side, the more strengths on the left side, the more someone will be what we call that trusted advisor, that thoughtful, relational individual. The more strengths on the red, orange side, the more that person is a type A driver, break through the wall type of person. And then we've got two fan blades. We've got the relating acting side of things. And what you see there is someone who can create great relational cohesion and then drive that into a team accomplishing something, or a group of people. Then we have the thinking, motivating side. So someone is in that internal, in their head creating, and then it bursts out. I like to use the analogy, it's like Old Faithful, where all the thinking and pressure is under the surface, and when the heat gets to a certain point, it pops up, and then it with these creative ideas, and then it dissipates back down again, and they have to go and recover. So that kind of gives you a range of the rings, the thinking, acting, think of it as think, do underneath, and those are internal. So the more strengths in that range, the more you tend to be an introvert. In other words, you get your energy there. Now, you can be what we call an outgoing introvert, and I fit that category because in real time, like in a presentation or something, lots of energy in a coaching session or a workshop, very animated. But when I'm done, it took a lot out of me. So I need recovery time. And you can be what we call a private extrovert. In other words, your external activation comes from people, but it's tighter group of people, like a dinner party versus a social mixer. I'll go into what we can do with it next. The first thing you can do with it is you see a pattern, and immediately, if somebody has 3 or more strengths in the thinking zone, what does that tell you? Where do they get most energized?
In their head.
They're in their head,
private.
right? 2 or 3 strengths in the orange acting zone, what do you know?
They don't stop moving.
If they have 2 or more strengths in the red motivating zone, what do you know?
Take up a lot of space.
They take up a lot of space, and they like to be in
They're
front
the
of people.
first ones to respond to questions.
That's right.
There you go. Yeah, and we got 2 of them right here. And if they have 2 or more strengths in the relating zone, what do we know?
Very thoughtful.
And they get into rhythm with people. So how people respond, behave, they mirror. There's a mirroring that goes on in the blue. And a lot of times they'll wonder how they're coming across, or they'll second guess that. People
Like
with the red,
grease and glue.
what's that? Like grease and glue. Explain that.
Sometimes they're holding the team together. Sometimes they're dissolving the friction points.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's right. That's a great metaphor. I like that. Yeah. So this gives you a little bit of this pattern language. The other thing you know too is where somebody will recharge. So if someone's got 3 thinking strengths, as Heather said, they're going to go into their head and recharge. Now, one of the stories I tell is when my son was with me with a group in Culver City that was really hard to work with. They were really dysfunctional and having a hard time. And we made lots of progress. And his role was to make sure everybody had the right handouts. He's got 3 relating strengths. So what does he like to do? That's a question for you guys to answer.
What you had him doing,
Oh.
getting to know the people and seeing what are their concerns, what are their needs behind the scenes. Kind of get the pulse of the team.
Yeah, that's what he would have liked to do. That's not what his role assignment was. So that's part of my job design. I didn't design it for that to be energizing. I just designed it for him to just make sure people had their stuff. And at the time, I had 3 thinking strengths. At the end of the day, this was draining for me. We got in the car and I went into radio silence. I wasn't saying a word. So remember that the blue really picks up on nonverbal cues. What can you imagine my son might be thinking when we get in the car, we're done with the workshop, I don't say a word, I just go right up into my head and I'm silent.
He screwed up something.
Yes. And some backstory, he was traveling with me because we had some blow ups and things didn't go well. And I said, just travel. Let's figure out each other as we travel. We have something called a rule of engagement. When he was experiencing this awkwardness, and when you experience an awkwardness, I've trained him in this acronym called NIMSU. No information, make stuff up. So the training was, if you're feeling something, don't make up a story in your head. Dad must be pissed off or something. Just ask. Now, his question was brilliant. He said, why did you go from engaged dad in the workshop to boring dad in the car? It woke me up from my kind of trance of just trying to get in my head and thinking through the day to saying, wow, what a great question. Here's what is going on. That was a tough group. took a lot out of me. I typically like to be quiet. That's one of the reasons I like to travel, is because I can get in my head and just rejuvenate and rethink things and all of that. But I also knew too, he was signaling to me that he also did not get to use his 3 blue strengths all day. He was tired and drained too. And I knew that he wanted to connect because that's what he needed. This is a little bit of a Jedi trick. And the Jedi trick is, how do I activate my strengths in a way to rejuvenate? Because when you activate a strength, you're releasing dopamine immediately. And then if it's relational and you release enough dopamine, you can move into serotonin. That's that psychological safety and that connection. One of my go-to strengths when I want to recharge is my learner strength. So turning on a podcast, asking a question, being curious, that's all second nature and automatic. I began asking him a series of questions. What worked in the workshop? What would you do differently? Who was most engaged? Who did we have the most trouble with? What would you change? That was all like popcorn. It was easy to do. And as I was asking and we were talking, then both of our relators began to go a little deeper with it. He was getting re-engaged and I was getting re-engaged. And so by the time we got to the hotel, we had a good rhythm and chemistry going. Then I said, hey, there's a BJ's across the street. Let's grab dinner and talk about it more. 6 months earlier, he would not have known about the rule of engagement and being curious and asking, why are you silent or whatever. What would likely have happened is that we would have gone to the hotel and parked, and I would have woken up from my trance. We wouldn't have talked the whole way and suggested we go to BJ's. And he probably would have said something like, no, Dad, I'm tired. I'm just going to go to my hotel room. So we'll see where these rings help you see dynamics between people and where energy flows and where there's collisions between them. One of the things that we provide is we've tried to merge both Genius Spark, the Gallup system, and the Core Clarity system. Core Clarity groups strengths based on how they're activated inside of you. And Gallup classifies them based on how they look to others. So let's go through some examples of these. Let's go down to the very bottom where we see adaptability and responsibility. Adaptability in the Gallup system is a relational strength because it looks on the outside like someone's easygoing. Core Clarity classifies it as an acting strength because it comes alive in spontaneous, in the moment, last minute kinds of adrenaline types of things. And that's when it does its best work. Oftentimes when I work with people with adaptability, I like to ask, when you go on vacation, you go on the highways or the back roads? A lot of times they'll say back roads. Or one person, it was funny, I was looking at, he had some other extreme intense strengths. And I said, you either drive a motorcycle or jump out of airplanes. And sometimes you get lucky. And he said, yeah, I do both. That's that adrenaline side. But the way it looks to others is that on a Friday afternoon, if you call somebody with adaptability and said, hey, I just found this cool restaurant, do you want to go? They'll drop everything and do it. Whereas somebody with consistency and discipline would say, nope, my day's planned. I'm not going to adapt to that. And then when we look at responsibility, Gallup classifies it in the orange or the acting range because it looks a lot like achiever. It gets things done. But the difference is that achievers get things done because of a sense of accomplishment, checking something off, and that renews and energizes them. People with responsibility get things done out of duty or obligation or loyalty, those kinds of things. So there's an emotional tax that somebody has with responsibility and getting things done. Now, when we look at it from a team standpoint, the significance there is that if a team is heavy on achievers, then they'll be fine, but they may burn out others. If a team is heavy with those with responsibility, They may overcommit, have a hard time saying no, feel guilty if it didn't go well. So there's a burnout side to it. So that's why this is valuable. And we decided that what we wanted to do is help people pick which one they identify with most. And what we found out in the experience, and it's not an algorithm, but what we found out, there's a tendency, for example, if achiever and discipline were in the same profile, responsibility would tend to become orange, be more on what we call the reliability side of the equation than the loyalty side. If there were more relating strengths like empathy and includer were in that, the responsibility would tend to show up blue in terms of how the person would select it. Now, the way that gets selected is on the right-hand side where you see the person's genius paragraph. And this particular person has 2 strengths that can be chameleon strengths. Let's see if you can pick the 2 that are the potential for being chameleon strengths.
Connectedness.
There you go. Yeah, connectedness is one, and then arranger is the other. Connectedness can be the 6 or 3 degrees of separation. There's someone in our group, Kurt Andre. I used to travel with him when we were at the same consulting firm, and we'd be in an airport and he'd start talking with somebody and all of a sudden found out that they both went to a German private school and their parents were in the military and they were a couple of years apart. This happened so many times that when I saw him start talking to somebody, I would just shake my head and say, here we go again. It's going to happen. And sure enough, it did. So he's got that instinctive radar that hones in on whatever the questions are. And I'm sure we all have that capacity. But again, these are those instinctive magical things that people have. Now, it can also be what we call a thinking strength, because connectedness also is able to link what looks like disparate ideas and things and sources, almost like going on Wikipedia and doing hyperlinks. They're able to see these things underneath the surface. Connectedness also happens to be one of the 2 spiritual strengths that Gallup talks about. In other words, those instincts about purpose or meaning. It intuitively asks the question, we must all be here for a reason type of questions. And then it finds those common connections in there. And so you can see here on the right-hand side bottom where this individual had the choice of either picking I live with purpose, it would have come out with the green side of it, or I share a lot in common with the people I meet. And that's the one they picked. So that turned it blue. They also picked arranger as orange. So that chameleon strength, they have another orange strength already there, the belief that could have been what influenced it. But the arranger side, as you can see here at the bottom of the circle on the left, the arranger can be either a puzzle solving strength, which would have put it in the green, or an optimizing strength, or an orchestrating people type of strength, which puts it in the orange. We can see that activator, self-assurance, and significance can either be in the motivating range and put self-assurance in the motivating range and put significance in the motivating range, because the energy of those strengths or the confidence of those strengths influence other people. But what core clarity says behind them is that the activator has this internal sense of urgency. So what's being activated is the urge to get something started. And core clarity would put it in the acting, because the self-assurance is that internal grounded confidence that you can take on anything you want. You're your compass. You take your compass bearings from your internal gut and confidence. And core clarity puts significance in the orange because the motivation is to make a difference, leave a legacy. But on the outside, those things look very motivating to others. Going back down again, we did responsibility and adaptability. Let's do deliberative. Deliberative can be a thinking strength if it's around identifying what can go wrong or what the risk is. Deliberative falls into the orange side. The green is the core clarity. The orange is the Gallup for both of these. And what Gallup would say about deliberative is it's preventing people from making mistakes. It's a preventative. It's not just diagnosing, but then it goes into preventative stage. If we go up to the connectedness consistency one, the consistency is around process, and it is a cousin to harmony. Consistency is about following the rules, everybody doing the same thing, making no exceptions. And if you do that, the connection with harmony is that if everybody is on the same page, rowing in the same direction, then you have relational consistency or relational harmony. Gallup classifies it as a relating strength because there's also a fairness side of it. Part of everybody following the same rules, on the outside, it looks like you're just being fair to everybody. And then when we're looking at communication, developer, and positivity, Gallup would put communication in the motivating side because someone who's articulate and someone who is a good wordsmith is motivating others. But Core Clarity puts it in the relating side because the internal activator is connecting with others. You're building a relational bridge and you're finding ways to reach and connect and build relationships. Developer on the Gallup side is in the blue. It's in the relating zone because Gallup on the outside, it looks like someone is like a coach or a mentor type. So they put that in the relational side. It's like the mom, the neighborhood mom everybody likes to go to, or the teacher everybody wants to have. Core Clarity puts it in the motivating side because the thing that activates it is seeing potential, and then how do we bring that out of somebody? Positivity, Gallup classifies it as a relating strength, being that upbeat friend. But Core Clarity puts it in the motivating zone because what activates it is to recognize people or to see potential and then bring it out by celebrating or having that can-do attitude. So they put it in the motivating zone. I'm going to pause there. I think this may have been the first time I've ever gone through in detail these chameleon strengths, and just want to get some reaction or questions.
I just had a quick question going back to consistency. I know you mentioned it like connected in a sense to harmony, and Gallup puts consistency in that area. Could you maybe talk a little bit about consistency in the thinking category?
So consistency is about process and following procedure and the rules. In workshops, when I find somebody with consistency, and especially consistency and harmony, I ask them what their routine is in the morning. And it's humorous, everybody chuckles, but the person gets up at the same time, has the same breakfast, takes the same route, and all of those. And then I branch off of that question and want to find out how they map out their day, or if fairness is important to them, and it unpacks all that. So consistency is the process side of everybody getting along together. If everyone follows the rules and the rules are clear, then everybody gets along.
I definitely like the way that we have grouped these, identified those crossovers, because Gallup definitely does not. They pretty much put them in one of the four and you're there. And it doesn't really look at what Rex and his team have put together to say, in this case, really there's 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them, almost half, a third, are really need to dive in a little bit more on yourself to figure out, okay, which direction should do I fit, right? It's really excellent. Thank you, Rex.
The first time we experimented with this was at a Ripple Intent conference, and I think there were 200 people in the room, and we had them manually. This is back when we were doing this manually. Next time is we'll go through each of the 15 archetypes. One of the things we started finding is that when people chose what zone those chameleon strengths fell into, their archetypes made more sense to them. And we heard this over and over again. Again, this is a tool to help people get clearer about where they get their energy from, where they're most fluent, and how they work with others. In the next session, we will go through the 15 archetypes and then talk about secondary archetypes in there. Because when you look at the pattern and you've got the servant leader with the 3 rings, and it's up there as the top because it's the most common one. What you begin to find is that someone with 3 greens, 1 orange, 1 blue, is a lot different than someone with 3 blues, 1 green, 1 orange, or someone with 3 oranges, 1 green, 1 blue. So that's a teaser for the next time for you guys. You'll have this inside knowledge of when you look at a ring, not all rings are the same. And there's a general pattern or idea. But again, for you in coaching, you want to be able to look at 2 rings and say, oh, this person is more like a sage or more like a pioneer as a secondary influence in this. Let me stop for a bit because we're at the end of our session and get some feedback and questions to help me get the next session queued up.
I think one piece of feedback is emphasizing the chameleon strengths. I think is pretty valuable because a lot of people will, at least even putting myself a part of this, like I've been thinking a lot about my chameleon strength and how it's all consuming in many ways, and how it also is shifting between the 2 extremes sometimes of like blue and green in case of my connectedness. And this is the first time we really talked about that in depth. And maybe that kind of emphasis is something that should be continued because the other ones fit in pretty easy buckets, right? The chameleons
Right.
are really the special sauce.
A third of the strengths are chameleon strengths.
Right.
This is unique. There's nothing out there that takes it to that degree. Just think of yourself as a poker player. And what we're doing is helping you see the patterns and understand. So quickly you can begin to see that if 2 people are having difficulty, you can see one person doesn't speak the language or speaks this language. And so I'll go into some of the collisions and conflict. I've also got a resource next time that I'll show you that we took out of the book. I've got a whole chapter that goes into in-depth on the shadow side of all of the rings. So for a servant leader, the shadow is the martyr. That's the shadow of the servant leader. So this alone is a system all in of itself. Even if you didn't know anything about the strengths, you could take the ring system. And there are other systems that do similar things like that, like Myers-Briggs or DISC. They have this pattern language. Ours is a little richer and it's tied to a deeper database, but it really does simplify things.
You're going to provide the presentation, Rex.
Yeah, I'll edit the video. I'll get the transcript and the text, so we'll have notes on it. And then I'll schedule another mastermind. If you're up for it, I'll schedule it for next week. And we'll just continue to dive in on going through the specific rings. And I'm getting a feel for the pacing of this. We probably will have 3 sessions just on the rings. All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Good to see you.